I'm delighted to welcome you to IHCD's first global webcast of 2022. We have been delayed, like many of you, in reinventing the future of our headquarters. So that has taken a good part of our attention this year. We are finished with that work and we are back to our enthusiastic presentation of global webcasts. I want to acknowledge that this series is dedicated, as we have done for some time, to the memory of an extraordinary young woman, Eliza Forrest Kaye Bromfield. And I want to acknowledge that we have captioning by our friends at Joyful Signing. So if you need captions today or just prefer to see them, please just click on it. I want to share with you what to expect of your time with us today, for which we are very grateful. Rama Gheerawo will present in the first half hour. Following Rama's presentation, we will have a conversation with Rama that will include a member of his team who has also been a person with a key role in the birth of this book, and that's Evelina Gadziva, and Jess Mendez. And Jess is a first time for IHCD Global Webcast, but she is our new Director of Communications at IHCD, Communications and Inclusive Impact, and I will be joining that conversation. Following that is an opportunity for our beloved audience to join us with questions and comments. Plenty of time for that. Please feel free to put those questions into the Q&A at any point during our presentation, and we will be going through them to share with Rama after the first hour. So first, I want to just introduce my longtime friend and colleague, Rama Gheerawo. I've had the pleasure of knowing Rama since he was a rising star, really still a student at the Helen Hamlyn Centre. But one could see the open-ended potential of the soft-spoken but intense designer from the very start. It has been deeply satisfying to witness his unfolding as a leader, stepping up at the RCA, in London, in the UK, and globally. His capacity for clear thinking, keen attention, and deep engagement have made it clear from the start, perhaps before he could see it, that he would be a leader for our time. Rama.
Thank you so much, Valerie and the IHCD, Jess and the team. I have to say, when I hear an introduction like that, Valerie, I look around the room to see if I recognize the person you're actually talking about. But this journey, this inclusive journey, this creative journey is something that I think we not just hold in our hands, we hold in our hearts. I think I remember the days of uncertainty. I remember the times when the work of our center and your center was so experimental, and it was exciting, exhilarating, but also innovating. And it just reminds me of something I write about that kind of time, and I think it speaks to the leader in us all, is just these simple words. The bird's most uncertain flight is its first, or the bird's most important flight is its first, born from uncertainty and difficulty, but driven by its ancestral memory of touching the sky. And I think for me, design, leadership, creativity, and inclusivity hold something of that ancestral memory. Excuse me. It's thirsty work doing webcast. Give me one tick. Great. I think I'm getting my voice back. Hopefully, sorry, it's a little, I think there's a lot of pollen in the air, but we'll get it back. I'm sorry about that, and sorry for all the noises. I don't know how the captioner is going to caption that. So we're here to talk about creative leadership. And where did this come from? What's behind it? Well, Eva and myself put together a group of questions that really ask, they really interrogate what is needed in leadership today. And, you know, top center is, what if a leadership book was written by a creative? Bottom left is, why is creativity left out of most leadership manuals? Top left, and on screen, is a series of tiles with a green background with black words. Top left is the most important one. You know, this is a book for all people, especially those who were never encouraged to lead. So the topic, creative leadership, has been brewing for about 15 years. And top right is a question around, how can leadership help achieve equity, diversity, and inclusivity? And inclusive design and universal design, which is very much the subject of the IHCD. In there, enshrined in there, is some absolute principles of equity, of equality, of empathy that I think can radiate outwards from design into leadership. So bottom right on the screen is a question that says, can inclusive design help to fix broken models of leadership? And that really is where we're at. On screen is the first sort of PDF we generated back in March when it was launched in the UK. I'm afraid it wasn't very inclusive then because it was only available in the UK, but now the book is available in lots of bookstores and you know, many retail giants online that are named after a South American river around the world. But it asks 3 clear questions. On the left of the screen in green, how can creativity fix broken models of leadership? That is the first. Next is, empathy is core to leadership, but what other values balance it? And third is, how do you achieve clarity in practice? So these 3 values really came to the fore from the research in order to work with each other and describe a new model of leadership. And no one was more surprised than me that someone else actually listened to it, that this actually seemed to make sense to other people. And to date, we've trained thousands of individuals and organizations such as the Hong Kong Civil Service, Panasonic, you know, lots of business, government, academia, and the third sector. On the next slide is a picture of 3 individuals. And this is because I want you to know I didn't do all of this work myself. There's a great TED talk that says it's not the person who came up with the idea that's important. It's actually the people that cluster around that amplify this into sky and space. So from left to right, there's a picture of Dr. Melanie Flory, who is a sort of fairly dark-skinned female with shoulder-length black hair. And she was the neuroscientist on the project. In the center is Dr. Ninela Ivanova, who's of Eastern European background. It's characteristically, uncharacteristically, she's not smiling in this picture, but she has long dark brown hair. And on right is Evelina, who you'll hear from later, Evelina Gadjeva, and she's smiling and beaming into the camera. And she is of Eastern European heritage, and she has her hair tied up and is wearing a white top. I should have described myself. So I'm a man with dark brown skin, black hair, and I like to think a nicely trimmed black beard, but you can send comments in the chat if you think otherwise. At the root of creative leadership are these 3 principles, and on screen are 3 colored circles. In the top left, there is empathy, top right, there is clarity, and at the bottom, there is creativity. And these three circles are overlapping because these three values interplay with each other. The magic is in the balance. And that's been the secret of creative leadership. The idea is that empathy, clarity, and creativity form a baseline as universal attributes that we all have access to, regardless of age, ability, gender, or race. We can all tap into them. And this was the aim, that the values should be universal, that everyone can reach them. And sometimes rather flippantly, I say empathy, I learned as a human being. Creativity, I learned as a designer, and the power of clarity, I learned from an ex-girlfriend. And we've all had that relationship where you think, what on earth happened there? And there is some truth in that. I think this quote from the World Economic Forum really says it all. It reads, "We have a problem, something is broken. The old leadership model does not work and is actually getting worse. A big shift in management and leadership is a long overdue change." And this was from an extract of a talk where we speak about humane leadership. I wanted to show a picture of me pre-lockdown, pre-beard, just to say that I'm an active designer, and the picture is me in the field doing research for a redesign of the London taxi. And I'm surrounded by other design researchers, and I'm holding what looks like a gun, but is actually a video camera, and pointing it at Fiona, the lady in the wheelchair. And here we're gently encouraging her to give us insights about the difficulties or the ease of taxi use. The beginnings of creative leadership go back to 2007, when I realized we need more creatives in a leadership position, and we need leaders who are more creative. We need both. And it was at the end of a hard couple of weeks, and I stood in the shower in tears because we had seen so many instances of exclusion. I'd seen an older lady shouted at in a care home. I'd seen visually impaired people who couldn't leave the house because the countries and cities they were in weren't accessible. I'd seen gender exclusion in South America, where, you know, the term repatriation was a neo form of colonialism, excluding the women of that country. And I'd come face to face with migrant workers in the Middle East who looked like me. And as they looked at me, they held my hands, they addressed me as brother and asked how I could help them. We cried together, we laughed together, we danced together, we ate together. And I came home, and that work, that design work, touched me to the point of over empathy, and I broke down in the shower. And I thought, is there one thing that we can change that would change everything? And the answer came resounding back: leadership. You change leadership and you change everything. So that began the journey of how do we address these multifarious instances of exclusion that we all see. So again, today's framing, that was 2007. In 2022, a good friend of mine and very much a sort of instigator and supporter, the previous director of the center, Jeremy Myerson, said, what you're doing, Rama, with creative leadership is using inclusive design to fix broken models of leadership. Ever the writer, ever the journalist, I thought he nailed it. So what is inclusive design? Well, we define it as including the needs of the widest number of people. That's it. Very simple. And these are the words on screen. I should say, when I don't describe what's on screen, it's just because I'm reading out the words that are there. On screen, though, you see a diagram which looks like a cross, like X marks the spot. And they're four axes. We call them the four axes of inclusive design, and that's the title text in the center. And the four axes are age, ability, gender, and race. And why do we need this? Well, the same sun rises and sets on us all every day, but that day can have a radically different experience depending on those classifiers, those qualifiers. You know, if your ability is reduced, your day can be different. If your skin color, is of a certain tone, your experience can be different. And a large instigator of this is design, of the barriers, but a large enabler, a bridge, is also design. So on to the next page. These lead into a couple of, 4 hashtags that you see out there of ageism, ableism, genderism, and racism. And we feel that as this has been rising in the world, inclusive design has a role to play. On the right of the screen, you see a sort of advert for a session that was called In Session. And that was the title series. And the particular program that we were running was called Exclusion. Why should design be doing more? And there are 4 names on this and 4 images, and they're all people of slightly darker hued tones. This was something I put together in the year following the murder of George Floyd. I don't think we can say murder. We should say murder. And I sat there in lockdown on my own, in my house, on the sofa, thinking, what can I do? And it took me a while to think about design as a way of stepping personally through that, because what that brought up for me as a dark-skinned person of Indian origin was the instances of exclusion that I'd felt, and some of them absolutely humiliating. The amount of times I've had my hands spread on the hood of a cop car, I can't count. I've been pulled off aircrafts, been taken out into car parks by skinheads to be beaten up. And I just thought that was part of accepted life. And at that moment, I realized I did not need to accept it. But I wasn't just for myself, wanted to look at others, and inclusive design being what it is, found 3 like-minded individuals. So this talk was, the other featured people were Dory Tunstall, the first Black Dean of Design in the Western Hemisphere, Carol Bilson, the first Bayesian president of the Design Management Institute, Mark Rutledge, the first Indigenous president of a graphic design association in the Western world, and myself, the first Indian director at the Royal College of Art, actually in the UK. I think I didn't realize this, someone else told me, but I was the senior most academic designer in the UK at one point, which surprised me. All of us got our roles within the last 5 years of doing this talk. And what it realized for us is we all had a leadership responsibility, a pathfinding responsibility, because many other people that attended that talk said, it's incredible to see a BIPOC panel, a panel of color that's all people of color. Ability is another thing. So on this slide from the Norwegian Design Council, you see a set of stairs and 4 people can't walk up it. An older person, a person in a wheelchair, someone carrying luggage, and a parent with a pushchair. So when we look at ability, another one of those axes, ability is everything. It's physical, it's mental, it's cognitive, it's widespread. And when we talk about working with people, on screen are 2 images of some of our researchers out there in the community talking to people. On the right is Peter, and he was from the US, doing a project with Panasonic that looked at older people and health. And He's out at 6 a.m. in a London park. The sun is rising and he's doing yoga with an older woman of African heritage. Our design work, I'm just going to show a couple of design slides. On screen is an image of 2 plates. On the left is a white plate where you can't really see the white food on a white plate. We've done a lot of work in care homes, and in one care home, they said our residents has given up. They don't know how, they don't want to eat. We looked at it as sort of creative leaders, as designers, observed, and we said, what happens if you change the color of the plate so they can actually see the food? And the residents started eating again. Turned out they hadn't given up on life. Aging eyes in a dimly lit space with bad lighting, white food on a white plate on a white tablecloth. They just couldn't see the food. And one of my absolute favorite projects is on screen at the moment, and it shows a sort of multicolored care home cubicle. We were set the challenge by the Hong Kong government. Could you retain the footprint of a care home bed, but could you triple the amount of usable space? So we asked the question, can you create a care home bed that rivals a first-class aircraft cabin? So why shouldn't the products and the tools that we don't think we'll need for decades, don't design anything for anyone that you wouldn't be willing to use? Simple principle, and it's a leadership principle. Don't do anything that you wouldn't ask, don't ask anyone else to do something that you yourself wouldn't do. And I think this is the final one. On screen are 4 images of the ambulance project that we did. Bottom right is the one I want to draw your attention to. And it was, can you restock the ambulance in 5 minutes instead of 45 minutes? Because it takes 45 minutes to open all the wardrobes in the back of an ambulance. And our solution is shown on screen, and it's 5 carry-on packs. They're the size of a large suitcase. So at the end of the shift, you take those 5 out and you put 5 new ones in. You've restocked the ambulance in 5 minutes instead of 45. It also means that, each of the pack is focused on a particular issue like maternity or wounds or burns. So the crew, the paramedics, if they know they're there for a burns victim, they take the burns pack out. So I'm going to speed up a little bit here so we can get to the conversation, but to focus a bit on inclusive design on creative leadership, wanted to ask these questions. What are the most powerful tools of the designer, or indeed of any individual? And for us, it's the head, your hands, and your heart. In creative leadership, your head maps to clarity, your hands map to creativity, and your heart maps to empathy. And although this is a simple way of describing it, and life is quite complex, I like simplicity as a designer. Creativity, clarity, and empathy are simple words. Head, hands, and heart are even simpler and more memorable. So what does it mean to design? A couple of things: to step into uncertainty and be comfortable with it, to shine a creative light first for yourself and then for others, and that's part of creative leadership. To improve the world, but especially your inner world. So a major part of creative leadership isn't about your effectiveness in the outer world. It's also, how do you start? How do you self-reflect? How do you self-energize? Lead yourself, then you can lead others. It's to always find solutions, especially in dark places and moments. My father passed away at the beginning of the pandemic, and in his eulogy, one of the words that came to me, because I wanted to talk about why we were born, and he didn't have an easy life, and he didn't give us always an easy life. And the truth that hit me is we were born to find grace in the darkest parts of our life. And that is something that I think also fuels creative leadership. It's not just for hashtag feeling blessed. You know, I've got a new kitten, I have a muffin, my day is blessed. What about the days when life is utterly challenging? How do you feel balanced? How do you move towards anything that looks blessed? And finally, these are bullet points on the screen. To design means to include, not exclude, to be a creator, not a destroyer, and to be part, I think, of the most special discipline on the planet. And this is where we all are. And again, Valerie, thank you for bringing me so early on in my career into the grace and the gentle shade of your space. When we talk about dark, you know, a realization that hit me was only the dark helps you truly appreciate the light. And the pandemic, if nothing else, has proved that. On screen is an image I took in the Veliangiri Hills in South India, where you have the darkness of the mountains at the bottom, the grayness of the clouds just above them, but then you've got this brilliant sunset lighting up the whole top half of the picture. You need both. So in yoga, we talk about this. Light wouldn't exist without the dark. And we need to learn how to appreciate both as leaders, as designers. Eva, myself, and the other colleagues ran a workshop last year, February, where we asked about 120 people from 34 different countries and regions. And on screen is a map of where they all are. I'm not going to delve into it, but we asked them what they wanted from leadership. We got them to create manifestos, and on screen you can see some of their manifestos, some of their words. So they, you know, in the center of the screen, you can see the words, know thyself. Below that is human reflection. People are talking about serving with mindfulness, inspired humility, strategic vision. No one mentions shareholder, stakeholder, profit, budget, or all of the things that we flood our leadership demands with. No one said it should be charisma, a kind of tall alpha personality broadcasting from a podium. People talked about radical empathy, kinship, clarity, a willingness to listen. And Eva did a mapping on this. We had hundreds and hundreds of input, but it came down to 5 things. Number 1, the first quality they wanted in a leader was active listening. Number 2 was empathy. Number 3 was adaptability. Number 4 was an understanding and an application of diversity. And number 5 was openness. So why are we not seeing this in leadership? And I'm going to set you all a little bit of homework. Go and have a look at leadership adverts. See how many of these words actually appear. So creative leadership, I'm just going to spend a few more minutes talking about the concept itself and what's in the book. So, you know, this we call this a little green book. And in the little green book is about 40,000 words that capture our research. It's a story, it's poetry, it's a textbook, it's a manual. I hope it's information and inspiration. So we say creative leadership is open sourcing leadership. It starts with you, internal first, external second. It is a transformational process, and it's personal and organizational. So that's a missing link. If you want to transform yourself personally, people say, have a holiday, go and do yoga, eat more carrots. Organizationally, if you want to be transformed, hire consultants. So I never understood why carrots was over here and consultants were over there. Creative leadership tries to bring them together. So you're not one person on the yoga retreat and another person in the office and a third person at home. Bring your authentic self together. These 3 values lead to authenticity. And just to show you an image, on screen is an image of fashion buyers from China and fashion CEOs. And we got them all to do yoga for creativity. They all reported that they what they created as a result of, this was a creative leadership workshop, what they did was much more personable, was much more self-generated, was much more powerful and much more creative. So creative leadership is about bringing living philosophy into personal and professional life. It's about recognizing that you do not treat imbalance with more imbalance. And often that's what we do in the leadership sphere. And, here I'm talking about leading yourself. Do we inflict more imbalance on ourselves to try and address an imbalance? And it's about giving people access to some of the most powerful parts of themselves. And Valerie, if it's okay, I'm just going to spend a little bit of, a couple of minutes each on each of the qualities. So the 3 pillars of creative leadership, and on screen is that diagram again, the circular diagram of empathy, clarity, creativity, each within their own circle, but the circles are overlapping. Empathy is a spectrum. So on the left of the screen, you have the Godfather, Marlon Brando, who had very little empathy at all. In the middle is a spoilt child who sometimes you have empathy for, but sometimes you don't. And on the right is the Dalai Lama, who maybe has too much empathy. So empathy is a movable quality, all 3 are moving values, and they move according to day, place, state. They're spectra. The next slide said clarity is a spectrum. And on the left is, the coronavirus. When that kicked off, there was a complete lack of clarity as to what to do. In the middle is a weather vane. And we've all heard of weather vane leaders who change with the latest opinion. And on the right is an image of Nike's slogan, "Just do it," because it's incredibly clear. And many times that's got me out of bed and onto the asphalt jogging. Creativity is a spectrum. So the 3 images here on the left is the Eye of Sauron, because that just did evil and produced more orcs. In the middle is an Italian shoemaker, because there's tradition here, but there's also new materials and new kind of techniques that come in. So you have to balance the tradition with new creative process. And on the right is an image of any art gallery, museum. It could be the Tate, the V&A, MoMA, because those places give you absolute creativity. We did part of our neuroscience mapping was looking at what people are doing. And we interviewed a number of leaders about words that they would use to describe leadership. And we realized they all do map around empathy, clarity, and creativity. That, and in the center of those 3 is something that we all strive to, which is authenticity. Creative leadership can be applied to people. And on screen, you can see some of the workshops that we run. So the picture on the left shows me standing amongst a group of people in an open masterclass. The picture on the right shows 3 female figures laughing, and the person with the stripy top and the kind of white blonde hair is a group captain in the Royal Air Force. And we've applied this to projects. And on screen, you see pictures of 2 of our projects. On the left is our London taxi redesign, and you can see an older lady in her 90s accessing our wooden prototype with her wheelchair. And on the right, you see one of Western Europe's largest art installations, which is on a bridge that people used to use to commit suicide from. And instead of putting up barbed wire, we actually lined the bridge with lighting, 8-foot tall lighting reeds. So who exemplifies this? Well, who leads with love on full display? And here's a picture of Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And I think she talks about empathy being her strength, not being a weakness. It's about other people's lives. And on screen is an image of Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft. And I think he talks about the best work happening when you know that it's not just work, but something that will improve others' lives. And very briefly, empathy, what is empathy? It's the ability to recognize, understand, and reflect on the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of others. It's not sympathy. So on screen is a cartoon, and the animal on the left is looking through a telescope at a situation, and underneath it says feeling sorry for. On the right are two animals kind of coming together with their heads together. They both look a little sad, and underneath it says feeling sorry with. So sympathy looks across the room and says, I'm sorry for you. Empathy walks across the room and says, I'm here with you. And I'm just going to skip some of that. A simple activator of empathy is language. And I often ask people, what are the most important words in the English language? And all of us like a good Hollywood movie, and it usually comes up as I love you. But for the empath, for the creative leader, the more important words are I see you. And we actually do a lot of work and neuroscience and head, heart, hand training around these three words and activating them. So a simple thing is either at work or at home, go and tell someone that you saw them. And this actually came from another ex-girlfriend, not the one Clarity came from. But this one actually at the end of the day would say to me things like, I saw that you filled up my car with petrol. I saw that you got my favorite food. I saw that you got my favorite magazine from the shop. So thank you for that. And it was really her wisdom that made me think, what happens if you just say, I see you to people a lot more and authentically? So clarity, the most understudied of the three principles, is having a clear understanding of the vision and direction of the organization or project. Very simply put, it's making things clear. Those are the three words on screen. It's when what you think, what you feel, what you say, and what you do are in a straight line. And this is my little trick for having a good night's sleep. When this is in a straight line, you don't need to go to sleep feeling crooked. Clarity, there's something that we say in creative leadership of honesty never needs to hide itself. So clarity can help you get a good night's sleep. And there's a little diagram here. Clarity is not consistency. So consistency is quite linear, and the cartoon on the left, the linear cartoon, is of a bulldozer going through the city and smashing everything because it's just linear. It's just flying, it's just going through. On the right is the same city, but a bird is flying through because it's flexible. So clarity is also about flexibility. Very finally, creativity is the ability of an individual or group to utilize intellect, skills, and resources to create solutions, services, or products that are novel, useful, and relevant. And the little cartoon here, it's showing brain versus brawn. So the brawn is a large gorilla struggling to lift a massive log. And then the brain bit on the right, you have a group of mice who, instead of struggling alone, are lifting the same log together. And that for us very much is kind of creativity. And another cartoon is here. Creativity is not just originality and looking good. And there's a peacock strutting and fluttering his feathers on the left. On the right, it's about doing good. So it's not looking good. It's not just looking good. It's also doing good. And I love this cartoon. There's this sort of slightly plump chicken with rockets strapped to her back, taking first aid somewhere. And sometimes creativity is messy, like the chicken, but useful, not like the peacock. We just say creativity, design is the act of creating together. And that's creative leadership. So I want to end with a picture of Melanie Ninella and Evelina, who were the people I mentioned before, and to say something that really resonated with Valerie and myself. There were many times I wanted to give up on this journey. There was many times I actually wrote a resignation letter to the publisher to say I couldn't do the book. And three qualities really kept me going. And when I look back, they manifested through these three people on screen. So for me, Melanie was grace, always shining grace, always meeting me at the bottom of my life and showing me the grace that exists around us. Ninella always holds faith. So when you think, oh, someone's published a book that trashes empathy, Ninella's like, we've done 15 years of research, have faith. And Eva, you can see from her smile, just pure joy. And she was the book manager. So it meant during lockdown, many evenings and weekends in those dark winter's night, and was an absolute delight to work with her. So I'm so glad she can be with us here today. And that's the presentation. Sorry, I went a bit over time. I got carried away.
Exactly what we wanted, for you to be carried away. Thank you, Rama. Really wonderful. So we are now going to bring forward our additional participants in a conversation with Rama. Rama, that was absolutely great fun, as well as deeply satisfying as a mini version of the book. So Jess and Evelina, can you join us with your camera, or you can choose to do that when you're ready to say something. But I'm very pleased that we have, I think, evidence of rising leaders joining us for this conversation, which is pure joy. I'm going to just kick this off, Rama, partly by reiterating some of what you've said, and partly by just reframing. And I find myself these days in what we hope is something akin to a post-COVID world, reminded constantly of Winston Churchill, never waste a crisis. That has been an old chestnut for 80 years, and yet boy is it very much in my mind today. And I think one of the things that is also important for us to note today, as it is often important for us to remind people of, is that our conversation about design, and in this case, design and leadership, is not limited to people who are professional designers. And I think one of the things that I frequently turn back to is actually referencing an American economist, a very high-profile American economist, who Herbert Simon, who was really one of the giants of the 20th century in the United States. But he talked about everyone as a designer who sees clearly what is and imagines what could be. And I think that's such a central core of what you're talking about. And I think for many young people who are trying to figure out, is design in my future? Do I need to think about pursuing a formal career in design or a formal credential in design? I think that starting point of the capacity to see clearly and to imagine what could be is a central piece. And you talk in the book about the power of dissatisfaction. And if we aren't in a moment of pervasive dissatisfaction, I don't know where we are. So speak to us about, where this all fits. Is this a moment of dissatisfaction that can gently move us forward?
I think absolutely. And design can be a present. So actually all of us have designed something today, whether it's our meals, our clothes, our journeys, how we're going to sit and look at this lecture, what our desktop looks like, what our living rooms look like. So everyone is a designer, or everyone has design capability. Everyone can be creative and everyone can be a leader. And I think that moment, those little moments of dissatisfaction, I chose dissatisfaction as a word because it's gentler than saying anger. Or, anger will burn bright like a flame, but there's then a firefly that dies in the morning. it's not a sustainable emotion. And if you always are in a state of anger, and this came from a cohort of people that I did some leadership training with 15 years ago. There was one girl who described herself as a warrior. She said, I have to be a warrior. And one night at dinner, got very relaxed, and sitting next to her, and I said, what happens if you dial down the warrior bit to dissatisfaction? Because if you're a warrior, the universe will send you wars. And she really thought about that, and she sort of changed some of her attitude to start talking a bit more with a bit more of an inclusive angle. And what happened is people stopped seeing that they need to go to war with her, and she got offered a job as an EDI officer at one of the most prestigious universities in the world, which is something she never thought she would get, because her statement was always her statements always felt angry. So anger has its place, but if you're going to live with someone that lifts the veil, it's be dissatisfied, because being dissatisfied helps you to look at questions. Why is that person doing that? It sort of lifts the veil on certain things, and never just accepting something for what it is, because there's so many workarounds, so many things that we just accept. If I'm female, I need to be quieter in meetings. If I'm brown, I need to be less visible. And I'm being generic here, but that little bit of dissatisfaction can just ask the question, is this actually right? Should I? And it can spur you on to your true purpose and your power. And the other thing just to say for that is, when you think of this, your true voice doesn't live in your mouth, it lives in your heart. So it isn't that you walk around with a dissatisfied heart, because you'd get a heart attack, but where you power up is powering up from within. So when you see that dissatisfaction, and it may be often presented in someone else or some other situation that you see, power up your heart and see what comes out first. Don't always just think rationally. Our education pushes us to rationalize everything, but let's bring the heart back into it. The heart is your deepest intelligence.
Thank you, Rama. I want to give an opportunity for Evelina to step in, and also to Jess. Evelina, do you want to
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure being here with you. Thank you, Rama, for your talk. Just to add a little bit to what Rama said about the dissatisfaction, and this is really kind of main drive. And don't forget that the creativity is inherited and it lies in all of us. Just the expression is different. And one of the maybe two biggest barriers for me personally, these are personal judgment, and comparison, oh, these are my best people or examples, and I'm not good as they are. And because I judge myself, I let other people to decide whether this is good or not. And as Rama said, follow what is within you, and you will know. Everyone will know. And this is the essential of the creative leadership. It's not a recipe. It is not about, oh, tomorrow wake up at 6 o'clock, see the sunshine, then do 10 breaths, breathe in, breathe out. And it's not that, it doesn't work like that. It works like focus on what is important to you, how you can go receive information from without, but then translate it from within and do something.
Thank you, Evelina. Jess, would you like to step up?
Absolutely. Thank you all for having me here today. When I think of incorporating creativity into my day-to-day, the term pleasure activism comes to mind. And it's as we work together to like rework these massive institutions or philosophies that kind of like shape the world, it's how can you find joy in your day to day? So something as simple as like picking your meal. How do I want to plate it? So like as I eat, I'm finding joy, or I don't know, going for a walk and like looking, like taking photos of like random things that I come across. I'm spending time in the Pacific Northwest, and I went on a hike the other day and I saw the fattest caterpillar crossing the hiking trail, and I just like recorded it because I thought the colors were beautiful. And looking back at something like that is a minor way of bringing joy. Yeah.
Thank you, Jess.
Of course.
Rama, one of the things that comes up repeatedly in the book is the importance of humility in leadership and the critical role of listening. Can you play that out a bit for us, please? Sure.
And I just wanted to reflect on something Eva said and Jess said, because it's essential. So what Eva was talking about of starting within, your level is the right level, is one of the principles. And Jess, we didn't get as specific as photographing caterpillars, but we did say inject a little joy into every day. And I love the caterpillar story. It's something Eva and myself talk about a little bit. Even if it's sometimes just stand in a city and look upwards, it's incredible what you see, and it can expand your mind, your soul to the size of a horizon, just to look up, to look at the sky. So this, to go to Valerie's question about humility and listening, humility was a contender in the early days. You know, do we call it humility? Do we call it empathy? But some experiences of when I was in my 20s, and, you know, I think I'm still learning from these, still paying off these experiences where humility, the act of being humble, meant people took advantage of you. Empathy just felt a lot more equitable. The other word that was a contender was compassion. But, you know, I'm Indian by ancestry. I'm West Indian by descent and British by birth. And when we were living in British Guyana as a family, the compassion of the Canadian Presbyterian Church, the compassion of the British Empire, compassion was a word my dad spat on, and my grandfather and my aunties, because it carried this idea of being greater than. And, you know, I don't want to delve too much into the family history unless people want me to, but compassion was not felt to be such an equitable thing. At the end of the day, you can call something crocodile, alligator, garwal. As long as it's got teeth and a tail, I won't touch it. I won't feed it with my fingers. So part of me, the non-academic part of me, just wants people to feel with their heart. But the academic part of me, we did a lot of research and ended up with empathy as the most equitable and understandable word in different languages. And the act of listening, I don't want to talk too much because there's other people on the panel. So I'm just going to end with a little story from the Indian wisdom tradition. So the book, you know, the activities, the questions, the statements after George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, actually made me bolder and more vocal about my heritage, and certain things that over the years I've probably tried to just put in the back room. They're now front and center. So this story is from the Indian wisdom tradition, and it demonstrates the power of humility and listening in one fell swoop. So the story is in the book, so I'm going to paraphrase it. But there was a very important man, a very important businessman, and he heard that there was a great mystic in town. So he said, I'll go and speak to the mystic. But his meetings ran over, and the mystic's lecture started at 8 o'clock in the evening and was going to end at 9. So this man was so important, he didn't get there until 8:57 p.m. And all he heard were the last couple of sentences, which said, everything is divine. The divine will not hurt the divine. So he said, well, I've got the essence of the lecture. So he walked away. As he's walking home, he sees an elephant coming the other way with its driver on the back. And he looks at the elephant. He said, the divine is in the elephant. The divine is in me. The divine cannot hurt the divine. So he just stood there with the self-importance of self-imposed clarity and holiness. And the driver's shouting at him to get out of the way. He doesn't get out of the way. So the elephant just picks him up and throws him to one side. So a bit battered and broken, he hobbles back to the mystic and says, your lecture is rubbish because you said this, the divine is everywhere and the divine won't hurt the divine. And look at how broken I am. And the mystic said, well, you didn't hear the whole lecture, did you? So I'm going to paraphrase it for you. You only half heard things. Yes, I said the divine is in the divine. The divine is in all of us. So it's in the elephant and it's in you. But it was also in the words of the elephant driver telling you to get out of the way. And that for me is just a beautiful example of humility and listening coming together.
Thank you, Rama. If I might just comment for a minute, I know that the Helen Hamlyn Centre and your work and our work at IHCD believes deeply in the dangers of intuition to answering the question about how to solve a problem, how to make things better. And we depend upon the direct participation and engagement with people whose lives are different from our own. And that expertise is a precious part of getting this right. And I think it would be valuable to share that, because I think one of the most frustrating trends in some aspects of design education in the last 15 years has really been this assumption of a special brand of intuition, which will get you wherever you need to go. And I think part of the humility is recognizing that we need the shared expertise of people whose lives are different from our own. If you could speak to your experience with that, and you tell it in the book in many stories about projects.
So I think I'll say a little bit and then actually want to bounce something to Eva to speak about her experiences in the field, and particularly being humble enough to actually, many times when we've worked together on an inclusive design project, Eva will come back empathic enough to actually see the real issue. So, you know, do we need to spend a lot of money redesigning the technology, or is the answer much simpler and to do with what we're wearing? And also having the boldness and the clarity to be able to say, this is it. But I think very simply, it's recognizing that people are experts in their own lives. You're not an expert in their life, but you're also an expert in your own life. The greatest challenge, though, is you don't look at your life very often. You don't spend the time to look at a caterpillar. You don't spend the time to look at how that joy might resonate, how it might chemically change you. You don't feel you have the time. So empathy is a two-way thing, and self-empathy is incredibly important. And I think the gentility of the Helen Hamlyn Centre was recognizing that people are not just guinea pigs, test subjects. They can also be authors of their own solution. And many people have wisdoms that can accelerate your own learning. So one of the most powerful things for me as hopefully a creative leader and a designer is my preconceptions are challenged very often, or I'm brought, Khalil Gibran talks about teaching being the act of walking to the boundaries of your own ignorance and then walking through. That's learning, that's teaching. A teacher is a person who brings you there. Learning is you doing that. So when you realize there's wisdom in people around you, in the space around you, in the sky around you, in the earth around you, when you are fully conscious of that, will you actually do some things that are exclusionary? Will you actually hurt another person? Will you actually hurt the planet? Will you actually hurt a neighborhood or a system or a strategy? So this gentility actually removes, in my mind, a lot of hurt and hate. And the thing with inclusive design, and here we walk through pathways that many others have tread for us before us, and particularly at the center, the founding director, Roger Coleman, and then the next director, Jeremy Meyerson, they laid, we describe ourselves as very different directors, but actually what binds us together is the passion of the heart and how that expresses. So that, I think, if anything, is reflective of the passion of the center. And there's so many people that have been through the center. So I just want to end by quoting a colleague of mine from an HR meeting. Got to bring HR in, got to love them. And they said, we don't necessarily employ the best designer, we employ the biggest heart. And the people in HR at that time, years ago, was struggling to understand that. But this person scored higher in the metrics by 0.5%. Why are you not employing them? Well, this person, she has a bigger heart.
Thank you, Rama. We're going to wrap up our panel, but I'd like to give deference to our two rising stars. So let's give Eva the first opportunity. Share with us what you want to make sure everybody hears, Eva.
Sorry, my thoughts were all about the empathy, and because
just jump in there, that's fine.
That's fine. Okay, I'm going to encourage everyone to trust themselves and experiment with their strengths, with their weaknesses, with their life, with everything, because this is going to make you progress. And start with yourself, have empathy with yourself, because this is open up the space for honesty. Then you will have clarity where and what to tackle, and then you will do the creativity, how creatively you can tackle whatever it is.
Thank you. And Jess. And Jess, I think you are an example of somebody who has been driven to interest in this work by lived experience through your brother. So you have appreciation of what you learn from your brother. Can you just do that for a minute?
Can you repeat the question? It cut out for us.
Basically, you have come to this work by a deep commitment to your brother and to understanding his lived experience and to what makes a difference in his life. Can you just speak to that for a minute? Because I think it's really important that the inspiration that you get is partly the inspiration not to take care or to fix, but to allow him to realize who he is as fully as he can.
Yeah, so I come from a marketing and production background, and during the pandemic, had to recognize that I needed to take a step back to kind of show up for my family more than anything. And that's simply because the systems around us just wasn't supporting us. And I think more and more, I'm just looking for ways to kind of understand how all moving parts of our lives can overlap and be more inclusive, clear, and creative. So everyone is an active participant in society, including my brother, who is high support needs and physically, intellectually, and developmentally delayed.
Thanks, Jess. And Jess has she models a way of talking about her brother and making life as good as it can be by a level of delight in what he communicates about what gives him joy. So great deal of admiration for that. So I think we are going to move to our audience. We have some questions in the Q&A, and we're going to feed those to Rama. And I think we can start with a terrific question from, as a leader, how does one find the balance? And this I'm going to credit Diana Bonfilio. As a leader, how does one find the balance between being empathetic and also setting limits and having hard conversations when those are needed? And she says this as a leader.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question, and actually that was one I've only glanced at a few, but that was one I was hoping you would ask, Valerie, because very simply it speaks to the interplay of the three values. So empathy is a road, empathy is a journey, it's a discovery, but we say at the end of empathy you need clarity. So actually you need empathic clarity in your life as a leader, and understanding of what that is, and the creativity to deploy that into solutions. But over empathy is a massive danger, and we speak about that in the book. And I think this is why in my 20s the humility angle became so rife and rampant. And I still struggle with over empathy. I think the term that people talk about a lot now is people pleaser. And you've got to be careful that empathy doesn't blow you into that direction. Because if you only have empathy, you may be a people pleaser or a pushover. If you only have clarity, you may be a dictator. I mean, dictators of history were extremely clear what they were doing. They had a mission and they were very clear about it. They could put it into a sentence. And if you just have creativity, and many of us experience this, you could be a bicycle pedaling hard, but with no chain, so going nowhere. So you need clarity to give you direction, and self-clarity, and clarity of what's going on around you, clarity of how to communicate. But clarity is basically, in the model, it's that thing allied with empathy that stops you going off the empathic cliff.
Thank you, Rama. We have a question that is from our colleague Nat Hosono, who has probably stayed up later than anyone else in the audience. Nat is a colleague and a dear friend in Tokyo, where it is the wee hours of the morning. So we started at his 1:30 a.m. So he is still with us, and he has a very important question. And I think it's important because Rama and I have had the privilege of working extensively in Japan. And Nat is asking, he's participating from Tokyo. You talked about age, ability, gender, and race. We are a homogenous society, a non-diverse society, and a novice in the race question. My question is how to include empathy, clarity, and creativity in their design.
A beautiful question, and bless you for staying up. I hope we haven't put you to sleep. Japan is a sort of beautiful jewel of an island, of a space, of a country. And, I've been everywhere from Fukuoka to Fukushima to Osaka to Tokyo to Kyoto. So I feel there's a resonance with your question. I think every country, every individual has work to do. It's probably a reason why we're on this planet of ours. But the author Richard Bach said, here's a test to find out if your mission on Earth is finished. If you're alive, it isn't. And a big part of your mission may not be sort of building Tesla or building Amazon. A big part of your life is starting within. So I may ask Eva if she has any reflections on this, but that thing of starting within, Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change. And it can be lonely, because he also said the best and most powerful work was done in the wilderness. And I think that's where it starts. So how does that framework of age, ability, gender, and race land with you? What does it mean to you? What exclusions do you see around you? And how might you address them? And just starting to do that, just asking the questions, there'll be powerful insights of how they deploy. And how they deploy, typically, you know, empathy comes first. The heart is, you know, 10 times quicker than the mind. Well, or maybe 100 times quicker. We need Melanie, the neuroscientist, to give us some quantifiable data here. But, you know, the next time you see something that leaves you gently dissatisfied, how are you going to act on it? Then take it to your head. You know, is this legal? Is this ethical? Is this beneficial? And then allow your hands to creativity solve it. So I'm talking generally here, but so many times in my life, that's been the most powerful thing. And to bring it to something specific, it may simply be just gently pointing out something or stridently pointing out something to someone. So, you know, I said I've always kind of, you know, played down the fact of my color and cultural heritage. And, you know, I'm an active designer. I work with business. I'm a lecturer. I run workshops. I'm a coach. But I'm also an academic. You know, life, you know, shouldn't be boring. Full of many caterpillars. When I was in an academic conversation, and there was a conversation where whoever had printed the text had only put professor in front of the English older male, and the Western European females, they didn't have their titles. And it turned out that, you know, one of the colleagues was just tired and it was the victim of a copy and a paste thing. But there was a sort of joke going around of, oh, you know, men and women, and you know, the men always have their titles and the women get left out. And there is a truism there, but I sort of waited till the conversation died down, and I said something which I wouldn't have normally said, which was, I'd just like to point out, as the person with the darkest skin color, I was never given the title to be left off the print. You know, I've been refused the title that you all are joking about. And there was just a moment there of putting another consideration in front of them, of that group, not in a harsh infliction because they're colleagues, but one of the women actually texted me on Zoom and said, thank you for pointing that out, because we were just seeing you as a man, and that's a single story from your point of view. So thank you for diversifying that. So find your level, find your voice, let your head, heart, and action, let your head, your heart, then head, then hand guide you into action. And I don't know, Eva, if there was anything you wanted to add to that. She knows the book better than me, by the way.
It's a minor thing. This is our inside joke. That is very hard to talk after Rama because he says everything. Or just a small one that, yeah, this is a major diagram that we had, and this is age, gender, race, and ability. But as Rama said, the examples of exclusion can come in so many different types and examples, and it could be economically, it could be social, it could be educational, and they are unfortunately all around us. So as Ram said, just look around and see, feel. Thank you,
Eva. If I might just speak a little bit to Nat and his point, because those of us that have had the privilege of working in Japan know that there's something that is deeply definitive of the Japanese society, and that is an absolute certainty of our interdependence. And I live in a culture that is overwhelmed by a sense of individualism and autonomy. And it is one of the things that also characterizes our short-sighted thinking about leadership. And I think there's a great deal to learn from thinking about interdependence as a guide to thinking differently about leadership. And for us here in the US and at IHCD, we have been really looking at the changing reality of disability. And part of that has been really looking at the diversity of the rich diversity of our culture. And one of the places we've been digging in is Indigenous societies in America. And Indigenous societies are characterized by a very different worldview that shares a lot with Japan, that this is about interdependence and not about autonomy. There are no words for disability in most of the hundreds of languages of Indigenous Americans, because it isn't about identity or separating yourself. It's about everyone providing something unique to the balance of the group. And I think that interdependence is something with deep value. Just a thought on that.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, you know, and just a sentence on that. If we, I heard this wonderful phrase of be a good ancestor, because it speaks to that dependence, you know, that interdependency is kind of in there. And, you know, within you know, again, some Indian frameworks and beliefs, what you do now is influenced by 7 generations that went before you, and what you do now will influence 7 generations hence, whether that's environmentally, emotionally, economically, or energetically, all beginning with E. You know, there's that sort of statement. So interdependency, and thank you, a beautiful thought.
Rama, one of the things that I think I would just like you to speak to, and that has to do with the role of urgency and sense of urgency, because for me, this time feels like we need to inculcate a sense of urgency because the alarm bells are going off about our planet, about our inequity, and that sense of urgency. It is time to act, and yet you caution an overemphasis on urgency. I think that's something that would be very valuable for you to unpack for us.
Sure. I think moving too fast, you can actually miss what is right next to you, right in front of you, right behind you, where you've come from, because you can be so goal orientated. And it's not, you know, we have this saying that life is short, but actually for the creative leader, life is long. You know, longevity has gone up. And if you're just living life, you know, dominated by a series of urgent asks, urgent requests, stress, urgency does not, you know, you can look at urgency in a couple of different ways. And I want to draw a visual picture of a plane. So on the ground, a plane isn't very urgent. You know, it's a great big lumbering giant, but in the air, it's weightless. It's a, you know, it's a flighted bird, and it moves with graceful urgency. So what really struck me, you know, I studied different philosophies and music, and even a type of yoga called Nada yoga, which is the yoga of sound, when I was in my 20s. And it was actually brought to life by that great sort of English epic, Far from the Madding Crowd, because somewhere in there they talk about being the center of the wheel. So a wheel is doing very urgent things. It's moving really, really quickly. But can you have that reference point back to the center of the wheel, back to that stillness, back to that vision? So I don't have too much against urgency. You know, we have to act, we have to move, but it's how do you move? You know, do you move with the urgency of a plane crawling around on the ground? Or do you take some time to step back and step forward? Another great influencer in my early days was a guy called Martin Bontoft from IDEO. And he said, the longer you can stay in the entropy of uncertainty in inclusive design, the longer you can be in that period of not knowing, the more you will actually know, the more you will actually do. And to quote a couple more designers, Jens Bersen, the Danish designer, he said the problem comes first. And Jeremy Meyerson, our previous director, said, and the problem is people don't spend enough time understanding problems. So there's no bad solutions, there's only bad problems. And you were so urgent to catapult to the finish, you didn't talk to anyone, or you only talked to Jess, you didn't talk to Eva, or you only talked to Jess and Eva, you didn't talk to Valerie. So that I think is where the comment about urgency comes into play. So urgency is different from swiftly, and it's different, you know, and if you're going to be urgent, be intelligent about it. So,
and I think one of the things that we have both come to really value over time is that the work that we do of listening, of taking our time, and really maximizing the number of voices that we listen to closely, is that it is actually the fuel that keeps us going. That's our fuel. It's those voices helping us to see things we could not otherwise access. And I think that's a really important lesson for us.
Yeah, it's there in the story of the hare and the tortoise. I'd quite like to be both, though.
Jess's caterpillar that will one day be a butterfly.
Yeah. I saw this wonderful thing in the plains of Africa. So, you know, people talk about duality, and the great things about designers and creatives is we live in complexity. You can be two things at once, you can be five things at once, and we understand that. And you know, just plan a conference and talk to the conference organizers about how your creative process work, and you can see the differences that sometimes go on, because, you know, conference planners have an amazing ability to do one thing after the other, or a wedding planner, and a creative, you've got 50 different things going on at once. And this was really struck by me, and I'm kind of experimenting with putting out a video, but was in Africa on a trip in the Masai Mara, and there were two lionesses, two lion sisters in the grass, and you could see them. They were looking at a group of warthog in the distance. So the guide pulled up, and he was, you know, the guide pulled up, and he was like, let's just wait. So it was cool just hanging out with the lion sisters, and you could see them, you know, crawling closer and closer. And then a big male buffalo, a lone buffalo, came and walked through the warthog family. They ran away. He spoiled the whole thing. And then he just walked towards the lionesses. And you know, other cars came in, and you could hear people saying, oh, there's going to be a fight. But, you know, it was extremely balanced, because he just walked towards the lion sisters. They actually didn't move, and he was within a meter of them, and he ignored them. And what just came to mind was he sort of walked with an amazing certainty and a terrific sense of his own presence. You know, they're not going to attack me. But they also had wisdom as well. He had the wisdom. So his wisdom of truth and certainty in myself, and theirs was the certainty of, we know which fight to pick, and it's not with you. So I sort of wrote this little story which ended, be both the lion and the buffalo, and be both, you know which fights to pick, and also know that you are strong and rooted in truth.
Thank you. I must say the lion sisters will build quite a memorable image in my head.
They look like twins. They have the similar markings on the back of their heads.
We do not have a great many more questions. I do want to give the audience a chance to, if there's a burning question that you would like to ask or a comment you'd like to make, please step up.
May I jump in?
Please, Jess.
I see one question from Alexi that says, I would love to hear the panelists speak more about the link between pleasure activism, how to bring the activism and joy into leadership by design. I think kind of piggybacking off of Rama said with like the problem comes first. I think when you also put joy first, it offers space for like marginalized voices to redefine what works and what should be, which hasn't been an opportunity for generations. And joy lives in the details, and design also lives in the details. So in the example of having a nutritious meal, how is the plate designed? I think we learned from the example of having the blue plate, white food stands up against it, but also like with my experiences with my brother and also my grandma, utensils are important. When it comes to exploring nature, having walking paths or like parks that allow for different levels of accessibility is important. And I think in tech, offering like functionality and features that allow for like multiple to participate is extremely valuable. And I kind of want to pose this question to Ivana and Rama. So the AI systems at Meta, so Instagram and Facebook, have been like repeatedly flagged for like denying ads for small businesses that use models with physical disabilities. And I noticed in the book, you noted working with brands like Sony, Samsung, and Panasonic. And how are you coaching them to being more people-centered in a world that's advancing towards VR and AI?
Thank you, Jess.
So a rich question there. I don't know, Eva, do you want to go first? Because I don't want to go first and say everything. And I don't want to put you on the spot either, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I believe that actually we are teaching them what is your introduction in Instagram, which is human first, designer second. So actually, this is what we are kind of teaching them to, and that is why we are keeping, just to circle back, that is why we are keeping the term empathy in creative leadership, because this is the core of inclusive design. This is where it all comes from. This is the main drive, and empathy is really kind of, people don't, it's a very sexy word nowadays, but back then when we were talking about inclusive design and empathy, we didn't have many friends around the table as we are talking with Rama, but now it's a very kind of sexy word, and people just don't know how to deploy it and how to use it. And this is what we are teaching in our courses, and how to start with that, and how to then develop, progress, and go further. And also that along the way, you can, that's why I'm talking about experiment. It is about questioning, it is about doing mistakes, but learning from mistakes and leaving the guilt, and also have a little bit of sense of joy or a humor, because otherwise we are too serious and only pointing to this is wrong, it should be this, it should be that. And when we are talking like this, people tend to shut down and get closed, and we want to open their heart, their mind, so they can develop further. Sorry, I've been talking too much. Rama, please.
No, not at all. It's a real wisdom. You can see why we get on. And I think if you know, because there was a lot there, Jess, the going just picking up on the joy thing, you know, joy isn't one thing, it's many things. I think joy isn't just small, it's also big. I think joy isn't just tangible, it's intangible. And a simple thing with inclusive design is if you can give people permission to be joyful, and I hate to use the word permission, but that's sometimes needed, and your product can do that. One of the most amazing things that was said to me, we did a project with Samsung, and one thing that I heard from two older people was they said, you know, this isn't a device. We don't care about the screen size and the pixels. This is us reading a bedtime story to our grandchildren in Australia. This is us speaking to our family and friends. This is us planning, you know, a trip with our neighbors. And in that was, you know, this was about 12, 13 years ago. And in that was the importance of what we are designing, whether it's digital, physical, whether it's AI, you know, whether it's a space, whether it's a place, a service. This, you know, this aspect of joy is often lost. And way back when in the center, we would often talk about delight. So you as a designer can make or break someone's day. So there was a video that became very famous amongst us, where this older lady was struggling to turn on the TV. So that's the before thing. And because she's got 90 buttons to choose from, then, you know, this lady in her 80s. And then the designer created this kind of tray and blocked out all the buttons she didn't need and just wrote instructions. And you can hear her kind of going, press the first button, press the next button. And the TV bursts into the life for the first time that year. She'd never been able to switch it on herself. And she turns to the camera, gives this broad smile and goes, and we used to show that video to say inclusive design is not just about functional requirement, it's about that smile. So what do we teach Sony, Samsung, and Panasonic? We teach them how to smile and teach them how to make people smile.
Thank you, Rama. Jess, does that answer your question? Anything?
Yes.
Okay. Very good. Okay. So we do not have a lot of questions, but I do want to share a comment by a colleague I know, a very talented young architect, who says, "Thank you so much for calibrating my clarity, reminding me to keep my empathy flowing and inspire the possibilities of my creativity. This afternoon, I return to my workday centered and optimistic." Thank you, Joe. Any last word, Rama?
I think if we could bottle what Joe said, that would yeah, it could become a new inclusive scent. But I'm truly, you know, truly honored to hear that. When Eva and I asked about creative leadership, and, you know, the other two, Mel and Nell, so, you know, the joy, faith, and grace trifecta, it's, you know, creative leadership, it's never one thing. It is what you make it. And when we are asked, what are the things you want to hear that can be really powerful? It's that kind of comment. And these are real names. There's Sarah in Texas, Richard in the UK, Aylal in Azerbaijan, all of whom at one of our very first workshops said, this gave me permission, it gave me the materials, it gave me the confidence, whatever qualifier you want to put there, to say that I am a leader and I was never built to be one. So that magic for us is really when, you know, creative leadership is for established leaders and emerging leaders. And, you know, that's a small group. The biggest group of all is those who are excluded from leadership by, whether by age, by ability, by gender, by race, or any of the other qualifiers we use to humanly exclude. So that is absolutely the magic. And I think the final sort of message is there is a creative leader in all of us. There is a creative voice. There is leadership voice, and a leadership voice can be soft and is often more powerful if it's soft and not loud. And I would just ask that you experiment with the three values. Look at what the book proposes. We have a creative leaders circle. We're doing a conference next month called Include, where we'll delve a little bit more into this. And Valerie, you don't know this yet, but we need to involve you. Things come full circle. But start with where your heart takes you, or your head takes you, or your hand takes you, and be open to that playful dance. And it is a playful dance between the two. And I think no one is ever too small. So the final words I want to share with you are a poem that my mother shared with me when I was 14 and felt really small, felt I didn't have a place in this world, felt that in the Indian community I was too dark-skinned, and beauty was light-skinned. I felt that I was too shy to talk to people, too shy to even talk to girls, too shy to sing. My sisters were performers, and I couldn't. And I was this sort of, bespectacled Asian overachiever living in London, totally invisible. And even my school report said he would never amount to much, in the leadership sphere, but he's suited to the quiet academic life, researching in a corner, basically. And my mother, being a teacher and a headmistress at the age of 24, whenever I think I have it hard, I think she was female, 24 years old, and she's now 78, so you can do the math. And she led a school, at the age of 24. So nothing is impossible. She's an absolute hero. And she had a way of gently teaching. And all she did, she didn't even respond to me. She just went and got a book. And it was a book of poems by Tagore. And she said, "This is you," and gave it to me. And the poem is this: "Who will take up my work?" asked the setting sun. And throughout the world, no one answered. Alone in the corner, dusty and forgotten, the earthenware lamp said, "I will, my lord, as best I can." So you don't have to be the sun or the moon. You can be an earthenware lamp. You can feel dusty and forgotten, but you will always shine your inner light to make sure that it has outer effect. And that is my hope, my wish, my prayer for you all.
Thank you, Rama. Beautifully spoken. Let me acknowledge one last person who has asked a question, and that is Ricardo Gomez, a beloved colleague of yours and mine, a member of my board of directors, and someone who has been envisioning this exact reality that you described so beautifully in the book for an extra generation. Ricardo was a pioneer in so many ways as a person of color, becoming a designer, becoming a professor, becoming a head of department, and has been an extraordinary global leader with extraordinary students who every year are following in his footsteps. So he is just asking about how would you inspire, mentor, or promote creative leadership, or the audacity of empowerment to the perceived powerless. So just if you have one last comment, I do want to respect that Ricardo has deep knowledge of these things.
Yeah, I feel almost a little standing in front of Ricardo, who is, a giant figure in many ways and so influential in my own thought processes, career. And in that of the centre, you know, I can remember meeting him in 2001. It's a little bit nervous, and now I've been talking about that and got a little bit emotional thinking about Ricardo. Could I ask you just to repeat the question again, Valerie?
Sure. And it's very, very articulately spoken here. How would you inspire, mentor, or promote creative leadership or the audacity of empowerment, which I think is a lovely phrase,
Yeah.
to the perceived powerless, the underrepresented?
It's something that I think has been living in the work that we do. And it's in the it's in many things, but very simply, it's in the articulation of the title. So if you're talking about joy, faith, grace, people find it difficult to listen. If you're quantifying things and talking about empathy, clarity, and creativity, and you give it a name, creative leadership, and it feels authentic to people, people listen, people are empowered. And in the 15 years of doing this, we've had to shout less, persuade less, speak less. It's been incredible that, going back to Diana's question about empathy and over empathy, people naturally realize they want a different conversation. And the really exciting thing for myself and Eva and the team is that there's a tidal wave of intention that's out there. There are more people who are excluded than who are included. And the simple prayer, if you like, from I haven't actually done this, but I should read something from the book. And I think this answers Ricardo's question. It's right at the end of the first chapter, because when people have an audacity of power, there's never an audacity of truth, because power shouts, but life whispers. And if you can give people the ability to listen, the ability to speak, they will hear its wisdom. And if you can say that life expresses its greatest wisdoms from within, that's creative leadership for us. And power can't stand in the way. And it's been a long time, you know, we have debates with people, we have discussions, but the truth is in the actions of creative leadership itself. Go and try out this empathic approach. Go and see other people. Go and enact I see you. And even some of the world's greatest debaters that I've met, some really powerful designers, are transformed even by that simple phrase. And it's not for everyone, but it shouldn't be for everyone. It is for everyone, but not everyone will gravitate to it. So I think simply living it and you know, is important. So I think hopefully this book helps, because I say and this will just take a couple of minutes, if that's okay, Valerie.
Please, Rama. Yes.
So it's the end of the first chapter, which is called "And Now Leadership." And that is reflective of the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali, which start in Sanskrit. They say, "And now yoga." And the inference there is that you've tried everything in life, it hadn't worked, and now yoga. So I wanted to borrow from that. You've tried lots of other things, and now leadership. So creative leadership is about open sourcing leadership. And I think that's the power, that it cannot be held down, Ricardo, even in, you know, when something is open sourced, it's out there. It's like trying to bottle the wind. It is about deconstructing it and reconstructing it together so that we are not held hostage to recurring and repeating challenges. It means an open mind, an open heart, and an open hand. It is not a closed fist, an authoritarian voice, or a knee on the neck. Leadership should not stifle breath, literally or figuratively. It should enable us to be the most vibrant and visible versions of ourselves. So the book does not make political statements. It makes human ones. It is not written to simply inform. It aims to inspire. It does not contain only business cases. It is also a journey of the soul. It does not teach career achievement. It is about life in all its dimensions. It is not about preaching. It is also about questioning. You get to decide the answers. It is not simply a personal story, management book, design publication, outline of business strategy, statement on holistic healing, or a list of insights, tips, or tricks. It touches on all of the above. In witnessing this book into existence, I write this dedication into its pages, that if there is a place in the world for creative leadership, it grows to fill it. That if the universe needs it, that if the universe needs, it becomes visible and vocal. That if there is a call for it, we can answer it with all of our heads, hearts, and hands. So in the face of abject power or absolute power, that is the force. And it's universal and it's human.
I would wager that Ricardo feels responded to. He is actually responding. So wonderful to be in your presence again, even if it is only virtually. Your collective creative leadership book is God-sent and eagerly awaited. It will be inspiring to know that your resourceful philosophy and wisdom will only be a page away. And for those of you looking for a copy of the book, it is of course available at that retail institution named after a large river in South America. Readily available. So Rama, we are in your debt. We are absolutely delighted to have spent time with you and Evelina and Jess, and always our deepest thanks to our ever reliable and talented PJ Moynihan, our producer. So many thanks all. Be well.